The homestead. The wind cut through the valley like a blade, carrying with it the scent of coming winter and the promise of harder days ahead. Samuel Hayes stood on the porch of his cabin, watching the storm clouds gather over the mountains. His coffee had gone cold in his hands, but he didn't notice. These days, he noticed less and less. It had been 2 years since Martha died. 2 years since consumption took her in the middle of a brutal February, leaving him alone on 100 acres of stubborn land that seemed determined to break him. The cabin felt too big now, too empty. Her sewing basket still sat by the window, gathering dust. Her apron still hung on the peg by the door. Sam was 34, though he felt older. The kind of older that came from losing the one thing that made getting up each morning worth the effort. He worked the land because it needed working, tended his cattle because they needed tending, and came into town for supplies because a man had to eat. But the fire had gone out of him somewhere along the way. That's why he'd finally put the notice up at Morrison's store. Housekeeper wanted. Room and board. Honest work for honest pay. He didn't expect much response. Most folks in Copper Creek knew about his wife, knew about the darkness that had settled over the Hayes place like fog in a valley. Women talked, and what they said wasn't encouraging for someone looking for steady employment. 3 days passed, then 4. Sam went about his business, checking cattle, mending fence, chopping wood for the winter ahead. He told himself it didn't matter if no one came. He'd managed alone this long. But on the 5th evening, as he sat cleaning his rifle by lamplight, he heard it. A knock at the door. Soft, hesitant, like whoever was out there wasn't sure they should be knocking at all. Sam set down the rifle and walked to the door, boots heavy on the wooden floor. When he opened it, the first thing he saw was snow. It had started falling while he worked, and now it came down thick and steady. Then he saw her. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back severe and gray eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. A carpetbag sat at her feet, and she wore a traveling dress that had seen better days. But it was clean, and so was she, and she stood straight despite the exhaustion written in every line of her body. "Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "I've come about the position." Sam stared at her for a moment, taking in the way she held herself, the careful control in her expression. "Kind of late to be traveling," he said finally. "I apologize. The stage was delayed and I didn't want to wait until morning." She paused, glancing past him into the warm glow of the cabin. "I need the work, sir." Something in her voice, a note of desperation carefully hidden but not quite concealed, made him step aside. "Come in out of the cold." She picked up her bag and stepped across the threshold, and Sam caught a whiff of lavender soap and travel dust. She looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furniture, the cold fireplace, the general air of a place where someone had stopped trying. "I'm Rebecca Walsh," she said, setting her bag down carefully. "I saw your notice at the store." "Sam Hayes." He gestured toward the table. "Sit." Coffee's still warm. She sat, hands folded in her lap, back straight. Everything about her spoke of careful control, of someone who had learned not to take up too much space. Sam poured coffee into a clean cup and set it before her. "You got experience?" he asked, settling across from her. "Yes, sir. I kept house for a family in Denver for 3 years before—" She paused, took a sip of coffee. "Before circumstances changed." Sam waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. He studied her face in the lamplight, noting the faint lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled just slightly around the cup. Someone running from something, he thought. The question was what? "Position's simple," he said. "Keep the house clean, cook meals, tend to laundry. Rooms upstairs, meals included, $15 a month." Her eyes widened slightly. That's very generous. "Work's hard, winter's harder. You sure you're up for it?" She met his gaze then, and he saw steel beneath the careful politeness. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Hayes." Something in the way she said it made him believe her. "All right. You can start tomorrow. I'll show you to your room." The room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. It had been meant for children that never came. Rebecca stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. "Thank you," she said quietly. Sam nodded and started to turn away, then stopped. "Mrs. Walsh, you running from something?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the falling snow. "Aren't we all, Mr. Hayes?" He left her to settle in and went back downstairs. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin, but inside felt different somehow. Less empty. He wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Morning came gray and cold, with 6 inches of fresh snow covering the ground. Sam was up before dawn, as always, stoking the fire and putting coffee on. He was surprised to find Rebecca already in the kitchen when he came in from feeding the cattle. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not looking up from the stove. "I took the liberty of starting breakfast." The smell of bacon and eggs filled the air, better than anything Sam had managed to cook for himself in months. She moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. "Smells good," he said, hanging his coat on the peg. She served him a plate without fanfare, then stood by the stove with her own smaller portion. Sam gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. No point standing when there's a perfectly good chair." She hesitated, then sat. They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the crackle of the fire. Sam found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. She ate like someone who hadn't always been sure where her next meal was coming from. Careful and grateful. "This is good," he said finally. "Thank you." She didn't smile, but some of the tension left her shoulders. After breakfast, Sam showed her around the cabin, pointing out where things were kept, explaining his routines. She listened carefully, asking practical questions, taking mental notes. By noon, she had swept the floors, organized the pantry, and started a pot of stew that made the whole place smell like home. Sam found excuses to come inside more often than usual, checking on the fire, getting water, looking for tools he didn't really need. Each time, he found her working steadily, quietly, transforming the neglected corners of his life, one task at a time. That evening, they sat at the table again, sharing the stew and fresh biscuits she'd somehow managed despite the limited supplies. The silence felt more comfortable this time, less like strangers and more like two people who understood that sometimes quiet was better than empty words. "I'll need to go into town for supplies tomorrow," Sam said as they finished eating. "You need anything?" "Just the basics for cooking. Flour, sugar, whatever you think we'll need for winter." Such a small word, but it carried weight. Sam nodded and went back to his stew. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the wind, Sam heard something he hadn't heard in 2 years. Footsteps overhead, the creak of floorboards, the small sounds of another person existing in his space. It should have felt intrusive, but it didn't. It felt like the house was breathing again. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Sam worked the land, tended the animals, repaired what needed repairing. Rebecca cleaned, cooked, mended his clothes with neat, careful stitches. They spoke little, but the silence between them was easy, comfortable. She had a way of moving through the cabin that didn't disturb the peace, only added to it. Sam noticed things. The way she always made sure his coffee was hot when he came in from chores. The way she'd mended the tear in his favorite shirt so skillfully he almost couldn't see where it had been damaged. The way she'd organized his late wife's sewing box without throwing anything away, just making it neat and accessible if he ever wanted to look through it. She was good at reading what was needed without being told. Never pushed, never pried, just quietly made things better wherever she could. It was on the 4th day that he started to notice other things too. the way she flinched when he moved too quickly, the way she always kept herself positioned near an exit, the way she'd go still and watchful whenever she heard horses approaching, relaxing only when they passed by without stopping. Someone had hurt her. Badly. Sam recognized the signs because he'd seen them before in wounded animals. The careful wariness, the readiness to run. It made him gentle in ways he hadn't thought about in years, made him announce himself when he entered a room, made him keep his movements slow and predictable. On Sunday, Sam hitched up the wagon to go into town for supplies. "You want to come along?" he asked. "Might be good to get out, see the town." Rebecca shook her head quickly. "I'd rather stay here if that's all right. There's plenty to do." He didn't push. Whatever she was running from, it was connected to people, to being seen. The isolation of the ranch was protection for her, and he understood that. In town, Sam found himself the subject of curious looks and whispered conversations. Mary Jenkins at the general store couldn't resist commenting. "Heard you took on a housekeeper," she said, eyes bright with gossip. "That's right." "Pretty thing, they say." Young Sam met her gaze steadily. "She's a good worker." "I'm sure she is." Mary's tone suggested she had opinions about what other qualities Rebecca might possess. "Just seems odd. A young woman taking a position so far from town. So isolated." "Some folks prefer the quiet," Sam said, loading flour into his wagon. But Mary's words stuck with him on the ride home. He knew what people were thinking, knew what they'd assume about a single man and a young woman living under the same roof. In a small town like Copper Creek, reputation mattered, especially for a woman. When he got home, he found Rebecca hanging laundry on the line, her movements quick and efficient despite the cold wind. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment her face was unguarded, almost relieved to see him. Then the careful mask slipped back into place. "How was town?" she asked. "Fine. Got everything we need." He started unloading supplies. "Rebecca, people might talk. About you being out here." She went still, her hands clenching around the wet sheet she'd been hanging. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "No, I don't. I just thought you should know." She nodded slowly. "I've dealt with gossip before, Mr. Hayes. As long as you're satisfied with my work." "I am." That seemed to settle it for her. But Sam found himself thinking about it as he carried supplies into the house. Rebecca deserved better than whispered speculation and sideways looks. She deserved protection, respect, the kind of consideration a good woman should expect. The thought surprised him with its intensity. That night, over supper, Sam made a decision. There's a dance coming up in town. End of the month. Harvest celebration. He kept his eyes on his plate. "Thought you might like to go." Rebecca's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "I don't think that's wise." "Why not?" "People will talk." "Let them." He looked up at her then, noting the way the lamplight caught in her hair, the delicate line of her jaw. "You've been working hard. You deserve a night out." She set down her fork, hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate the thought, but I think it's better if I stay here. Keep to myself." There was something in her voice, a note of finality that told him this wasn't about shyness or propriety. This was about fear. "All right," he said gently. "Just thought I'd offer." But the next day, Sam found himself thinking about it more. About the way Rebecca had looked when she'd refused, like she wanted to say yes, but couldn't allow herself the luxury. About the careful way she lived, always watching, always ready to disappear. He was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders, coming up the valley road at an easy pace. Sam set down the axe and walked to the front of the cabin, arriving just as the men dismounted. He recognized one of them, Tom Bradley, a deputy from the county seat. The other 2 were strangers, well-dressed men with the look of money and authority about them. "Afternoon, Sam," Bradley said, touching his hat brim. "These gentlemen are looking for someone. Thought you might have seen her." One of the strangers stepped forward, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. "We're looking for a young woman. Dark hair, gray eyes, goes by the name Rebecca. She's been missing from Denver for several weeks." Sam kept his face carefully neutral. "Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description." The man studied him for a long moment. "She's my daughter-in-law. Her husband is concerned about her welfare." There was something in the way he said it that made Sam's jaw tighten. Behind him, he heard the soft creak of the cabin door, then silence. Rebecca was listening. He was sure of it. "Like I said, I haven't seen anyone like that." Sam crossed his arms. "You boys want some coffee before you head back?" "That's kind of you," Bradley said, but the silver-haired man shook his head. "We should be getting back. But if you do see her, it would be a kindness to let us know. Her family is worried sick." They mounted up and rode away, and Sam watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he turn back to the cabin. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her face white as fresh snow. "They're gone?" Sam said quietly. She nodded but didn't move. He could see her hands shaking from where he stood. "Rebecca." He kept his voice gentle. "Want to tell me what this is really about?" For a moment he thought she might. Her lips parted, and something desperate flickered in her eyes. Then she shook her head and stepped back into the cabin. That night, Sam lay awake, listening to the sounds from upstairs. Pacing, soft crying, the creak of floorboards as she moved restlessly around the small room. Near midnight, he heard her come downstairs, her footsteps careful and quiet. He found her in the kitchen, fully dressed, her carpet bag packed and sitting by the door. "Leaving?" he asked. She jumped, spinning to face him. I thought it was best. Before they come back. They might not. They will." Her voice was flat, resigned. "He won't give up. He never gives up." Sam studied her face in the dim light from the dying fire. "Your husband?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My husband is dead, Mr. Hayes. Has been for 6 months. But his father—" She wrapped her arms around herself. "His father believes I killed his son." "Did you?" The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. He was drunk. He fell down the stairs. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I was in the kitchen when it happened." But he'd been angry with me that night. There were bruises. "The neighbors heard us fighting." Sam nodded slowly. "And his father? Powerful man. Owns half of Denver. When the sheriff ruled it an accident, he decided to take matters into his own hands." She touched her throat unconsciously. "He's convinced I'm a murderer who needs to pay for her crime." "So you ran." "I ran." She picked up her bag. "And now I have to keep running." "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes. You've been kind to me, but I won't bring trouble to your door." Sam looked at her standing there in her traveling dress, bag in hand, ready to disappear into the night, ready to spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, never safe, never settled. Something inside him rebelled against it. "No," he said. Rebecca blinked. "I'm sorry." "I said no. You're not leaving." "Mr. Hayes, you don't understand." "I understand plenty." He stepped closer, noting the way she tensed, ready to bolt. "I understand that you're scared. I understand that you think running is the only choice you have. But I also understand that this is your home now, and I don't let people get run off my land. This isn't your fight. It is now." The words surprised him with their certainty. "You belong here, Rebecca. Whatever happened in Denver, whatever his father thinks happened, it doesn't matter. You belong here." Tears spilled over her cheeks, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her careful control cracked. "You don't know what he's capable of. He has money, influence. He can make your life hell." Let him try. Sam reached out slowly, carefully, and took her bag from nerveless fingers. You're staying. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because her shoulders sagged with relief. All right, she whispered. All right. The next morning brought a different kind of tension to the cabin. Rebecca went through her usual routine, but there was a brittleness to her movements, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. Sam found himself checking the windows more often, listening for the sound of approaching horses. Around noon, he made a decision. I'm going into town, he announced. Need to talk to the sheriff. Rebecca looked up sharply from the bread dough she was kneading. No, please. It will only make things worse. Will it? Or will it make them better? Sam settled his hat on his head. Sheriff's a good man. Fair, if I explain the situation. He won't believe you over a man like Edmund Walsh. Rebecca's voice was tight with fear. He has connections everywhere. Maybe. But I have connections too. People who know me, trust me. Sometimes that carries more weight than money. He left her standing in the kitchen, flour on her hands and worry in her eyes. The ride into town gave him time to think, to plan what he would say. Sheriff Morrison was a practical man, more interested in keeping the peace than in playing politics. If Sam could make him understand. He found Morrison in his office, boots up on the desk, reading through wanted posters. The sheriff looked up as Sam entered, noting the serious expression on his face. Sam, what brings you to town? Need to talk to you about those men who came by yesterday. The ones looking for a woman. Morrison's feet came off the desk. What about them? Sam chose his words carefully. The woman they're looking for, she's got reason to be afraid of them. Good reason. You know where she is. I might. Morrison studied him for a long moment. She at your place? She might be. The sheriff sighed and leaned back in his chair. Sam, I appreciate your position here, but I got to tell you, Edmund Walsh is a powerful man. He's got the governor's ear, friends in high places. If he says this woman killed his son, did he show you any proof? Any evidence beyond his word? Morrison was quiet for a moment. No. But the boy is dead, and she ran. That don't look good. Maybe she ran because she was scared. Maybe she had good reason to be. What kind of reason? Sam met the sheriff's gaze steadily. The kind that leaves bruises. Understanding dawned in Morrison's eyes. He'd been sheriff long enough to know the signs, to recognize the patterns of violence that played out behind closed doors. That's a serious accusation, Sam. It's not an accusation. It's an explanation. Sam leaned forward. This woman, she's good people, Sheriff. Hard-working, honest, scared out of her wits but trying to build a decent life. That sound like a cold-blooded killer to you? Morrison was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the dusty Main Street. Finally, he spoke. Walsh is expecting me to let him know if she turns up. And maybe I've been real busy lately. Too busy to send telegrams. The sheriff met Sam's eyes. But Sam, if he brings the federal marshals into this, if he makes this official, I won't be able to help. Understood. Sam left the sheriff's office feeling cautiously optimistic. Morrison was a good man, but he was right about Walsh's influence. If this escalated beyond the local level, there might not be much anyone could do to protect Rebecca. He was walking toward his wagon when a voice called his name. Turning, he saw Father Mackenzie approaching, his weathered face creased with concern. Sam, good to see you. How are you holding up out there? Well enough, Father. The priest studied him for a moment. I heard you hired some help. A housekeeper. News traveled fast in small towns. Sam nodded. That's right. She's welcome at Sunday service if she's inclined. The Lord's house is open to all. There was something in the priest's tone, a gentle emphasis on the word all, that told Sam he'd heard the gossip, maybe even some version of the truth. "I'll let her know. Please do. And Sam, if you ever need to talk about anything at all, my door is always open." Sam touched his hat brim. "Appreciate that, Father." On the ride home, Sam found himself thinking about the priest's words, about sanctuary and protection, and the kind of community that looked after its own. Copper Creek wasn't Denver. People here might gossip, but they also understood the value of giving someone a second chance. He found Rebecca in the garden behind the cabin, pulling the last of the late vegetables before the frost could claim them. She looked up as he approached, her face anxious. "How did it go?" "Good, I think. Sheriff's a reasonable man." Some of the tension left her shoulders. And he's not in any hurry to send telegrams to Denver." Rebecca closed her eyes, swaying slightly with relief. Sam reached out instinctively to steady her, his hand gentle on her arm. She didn't pull away. "It's not over," he said quietly, "but it's a start." She nodded, then looked down at the vegetables in her basket. "I should get these inside. Make soup for dinner. Rebecca." She looked up at him, and he saw something different in her eyes. Not just fear and wariness, but a tentative hope. "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this." "I know," she whispered. "Thank you." That night, they sat longer over supper than usual, talking quietly about small things. The coming winter, plans for the spring planting, the way the light fell differently as the days grew shorter. It was the kind of conversation that married couples might have, comfortable and intimate, full of shared understanding. The thought should have disturbed Sam, but it didn't. Somewhere over the past weeks, Rebecca had become more than just his housekeeper. She'd become part of the fabric of his daily life, woven into the routine and rhythm of the ranch, in ways that felt natural, inevitable. Later, as Rebecca cleaned up after dinner, Sam found himself watching her move around the kitchen. She'd gained weight since arriving, he noticed. Her cheeks had more color, and the sharp edges of constant hunger had softened. She looked healthier, stronger, more like a woman building a life than one running from death. "Rebecca," he said suddenly. She looked up from the dishes, soapy hands still in the basin. "Yes?" "That dance I mentioned, the harvest celebration." He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous as a schoolboy. "Offer still stands, if you're interested." She was quiet for a moment, studying his face. "People will talk." "Yes, they will. They'll assume things. About us. Probably. And that doesn't concern you?" Sam stood and walked to where she stood at the sink, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her gray eyes, close enough to smell the faint scent of soap and lavender that always seemed to cling to her. "What concerns me," he said quietly, "is that you've been hiding so long you've forgotten how to live. What concerns me is that a good woman like you thinks she doesn't deserve a night of music and dancing and feeling normal." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I'm not sure I remember how to be normal." "Then maybe it's time to learn again." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Yes. I'd like to go to the dance." Sam smiled, the first real smile he'd felt in months. "Good. That's real good." The week leading up to the harvest dance passed in a blur of nervous energy. Rebecca threw herself into preparations, cleaning the cabin from top to bottom, preserving the last of the garden vegetables, mending every piece of clothing either of them owned. Sam found himself making excuses to stay close to the house, helping with chores that didn't really require his assistance, sitting longer over meals than necessary. They talked more during those days than they had since she'd arrived, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, the paths that had led them to this isolated valley. Rebecca told him about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about learning to cook at her mother's elbow, about the dreams she'd had of running her own household someday. Her voice grew wistful when she spoke of those innocent hopes, the plans that had been derailed by a hasty marriage to a man who'd seemed charming and kind until the wedding ring was on her finger. Sam shared memories of Martha, but found they came easier now, without the sharp edge of pain that had characterized every thought of his wife for the past 2 years. He could speak of her laughter, her stubborn streak, the way she'd hummed while she cooked, without feeling like the words were being torn from his chest. "She would have liked you," he told Rebecca one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You think so?" "I know so." She always said a person's character showed in how they treated the everyday moments. The way you handle the small kindnesses, the quiet work. She would have respected that. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I would have liked to know her." It wasn't until the words were out that Sam realized what they implied, that Rebecca was imagining a future here, a life that might have included friendship with his late wife, connections that went beyond mere survival. The night before the dance, Rebecca appeared in the kitchen wearing a dress Sam hadn't seen before. It was dark blue wool, simple but well-fitted, with small pearl buttons down the front and lace at the collar. She'd done something different with her hair, too, pinning it up in a way that showed the graceful line of her neck. "You look beautiful," Sam said, the words coming out rougher than he'd intended. Rebecca blushed, smoothing her hands over the skirt. "It's not too much. I haven't worn anything this nice in so long." "It's perfect." And it was. She looked like the woman she was meant to be. Confident, graceful, worthy of respect and admiration. Sam found himself looking forward to the dance with an anticipation that surprised him, eager to show the town what he'd known for weeks, that Rebecca Walsh was a lady in every sense of the word. The evening of the harvest dance dawned clear and cold, with stars bright as diamonds in the black sky. Sam hitched up the wagon and helped Rebecca onto the seat beside him, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her shawl. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted with a shaky laugh. "We don't have to stay long, just long enough to show your face, let people see you're not some mysterious creature to be whispered about." "And if they don't accept me?" Sam looked at her, taking in the courage it had taken for her to put on that dress, to agree to this public exposure despite her fears. "Then that's their loss." The community hall was blazing with light when they arrived, music and laughter spilling out into the night. Sam helped Rebecca down from the wagon, offering his arm as they walked toward the entrance. He could feel her tension, the way she held herself ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. "Remember," he murmured as they reached the door, "you belong here, as much as anyone." The moment they stepped inside, conversations quieted. Not stopped entirely, but muted, as people took in the sight of Sam Hayes with a woman on his arm. A beautiful woman they'd heard about but never seen. Sam felt Rebecca's grip tighten on his arm, but she kept her chin up, her expression pleasant and composed. He led her to the refreshment table, where Mary Jenkins was ladling punch with barely concealed curiosity. "Good evening, Mary," Sam said politely. "I'd like you to meet Rebecca Walsh." "Rebecca, this is Mrs. Jenkins. She runs the general store." Mary's eyes went wide, taking in Rebecca's neat appearance, her quiet dignity. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't this poised young woman who smiled politely and said, "How do you do, Mrs. Jenkins? Mr. Hayes has spoken so highly of your store." "Oh, well, thank you." Mary fumbled with the ladle, clearly thrown off her prepared script. "It's nice to meet you." The initial introduction set the tone for the evening. People who'd expected to find a scarlet woman or a mysterious temptress instead found themselves face to face with someone who was clearly a lady, soft-spoken and well-mannered, with an obvious affection and respect for Sam Hayes. When the band struck up a waltz, Sam turned to Rebecca with a slight bow. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated for just a moment, then placed her hand in his. "I'm a bit rusty." "So am I." But they weren't, not really. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, Rebecca light in his arms, Sam steady and sure as he guided her around the floor. Other couples joined them, but Sam barely noticed. His attention was entirely focused on the woman in his arms, the way she smiled up at him with genuine joy, the way she seemed to glow in the warm light of the lanterns. "Thank you," she said as the music ended. "For what?" "For reminding me who I used to be." They danced several more times that evening, talked with neighbors, shared refreshments and conversation. Rebecca charmed the elderly ladies with her interest in their quilting projects, impressed the men with her knowledge of farming and livestock, and gradually won over even the most skeptical members of the community. It was near the end of the evening when trouble arrived. Sam was fetching Rebecca a glass of cider when he saw them through the window. 3 riders approaching fast, their horses lathered with sweat despite the cold. He recognized one of them from the previous visit, but the other 2 were strangers, hard-faced men with the look of hired guns about them. Rebecca. His voice cut through the music and conversation as he crossed quickly to where she stood talking with the preacher's wife. "We need to go. Now." She took one look at his face and understood. Without argument, she gathered her shawl and followed him toward the door. But they were too late. The men had already dismounted and were pushing through the entrance, their eyes scanning the room until they found what they were looking for. "Mrs. Walsh," the tall man with silver hair said loudly, cutting through the suddenly quiet room. "How nice to finally meet you face to face." Rebecca had gone pale, but she didn't cower. If anything, she seemed to draw strength from the crowd around her, from Sam's steady presence at her side. "Mr. Walsh," she said quietly, "I'm surprised to see you here." "I'm sure you are." Edmund Walsh's voice carried clearly through the room, pitched to ensure everyone could hear. "Considering you murdered my son and ran like a thief in the night?" A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Sam stepped forward, his jaw tight with anger. "That's enough." Walsh barely spared him a glance. "This is family business, Mr. Hayes. It doesn't concern you. When you come into my community and start throwing accusations around, it concerns me plenty." Sheriff Morrison pushed through the crowd, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Mr. Walsh, I thought we agreed you'd wait for the proper authorities to handle this matter." "The proper authorities seem to be taking their time," Walsh said coldly. "I decided to handle it myself." "That's not how the law works." Morrison's voice was firm, but calm. "Mrs. Walsh, you're welcome to come with me voluntarily to discuss this matter, or we can wait for the federal marshals to sort it out. Your choice." Rebecca straightened, and Sam saw the woman she really was beneath the fear. Strong, dignified, unbroken despite everything she'd endured. "I'll come with you, Sheriff," she said clearly. "I have nothing to hide." But as she started to step forward, Sam caught her arm. "No." Everyone turned to stare at him. Rebecca looked confused, Morrison frowned, and Walsh's eyes narrowed with interest. "Sam," Rebecca said quietly, "it's all right. I need to. You need to stay right here." Sam's voice carried clearly through the room as he faced the crowd. "This woman has been working on my ranch for the past month. She's honest, hard-working, and decent. She's also been running from a man who wants to blame her for his son's death because it's easier than admitting his boy was a drunk who beat his wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Walsh's face went red with fury. "How dare you? How dare I what?" "Tell the truth?" Sam stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. "Look at her, all of you. Really look. Does she look like a killer to you? Or does she look like a woman who's been hurt and scared and running for her life?" Father Mackenzie stepped forward from the crowd. "Perhaps we should all take a breath here. Mr. Walsh, you've made serious accusations. Mrs. Walsh, you've been accused. Sheriff Morrison, what does the law say about this situation?" Morrison looked relieved to have the focus shifted to legal matters. "The law says that without evidence of a crime without a warrant, Mrs. Walsh is free to go about her business. Mr. Walsh, If you want to pursue this matter, you need to go through proper channels. I have witnesses, Walsh said coldly. People who heard them fighting that night. Witnesses to a fight, Morrison replied. Not to a murder. And from what I understand, the coroner in Denver ruled it an accidental death. Walsh's jaw worked furiously. The coroner was paid off. That's a serious accusation against a public official. You got proof of that too? The room waited. Walsh looked around at the faces surrounding him. Not the anonymous crowd he'd expected to find, but a community that had already begun to accept Rebecca as one of their own. These people had watched her dance with Sam Hayes, had seen the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, had witnessed her kindness and grace throughout the evening. This isn't over, Walsh said finally. I'll be back with federal marshals and proper warrants. You do that, Morrison replied calmly. Until then, Mrs. Walsh is under no obligation to go anywhere with you. Walsh and his men left, but not before Walsh fixed Rebecca with a stare that promised this was far from finished. The moment they were gone, the room erupted in conversation. Rebecca swayed slightly and Sam steadied her with a gentle hand. I need some air, she whispered. Sam guided her outside, away from the curious crowd and the buzz of speculation. They stood in the cold night air, their breath forming clouds in the darkness. I'm sorry, Rebecca said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I've ruined the evening for everyone. You didn't ruin anything. That man did. Sam turned her to face him. Rebecca, what you did in there, standing up to him with dignity, that took real courage. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified. Sometimes they're the same thing. People began to drift out of the hall, offering quiet words of support as they passed. Mary Jenkins stopped to pat Rebecca's hand. You're welcome in my store any time, dear. Don't you let that man's poison touch you. Father Mackenzie paused as well. Mrs. Walsh, if you ever need sanctuary, the church is always open. God protects the innocent. By the time they reached the wagon, Rebecca was crying quietly. Not from fear this time, but from overwhelmed gratitude. I can't believe they stood up for me. People who barely know me. They know enough, Sam said, helping her onto the wagon seat. They know character when they see it. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The evening had changed things between them, Sam realized. Standing up for her in public, claiming her as part of his community, his life. It had been as good as a declaration. Back at the cabin, Rebecca disappeared upstairs to change while Sam tended to the horse. When he came inside, she was sitting by the fire in her everyday dress, staring into the flames. He'll be back, she said without looking up. Probably. With federal marshals? Maybe. Sam. She turned to face him, and he saw the resignation in her eyes. I can't let you get hurt because of me. If he comes back with legal authority, then we'll deal with it when it happens. Sam sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Rebecca, I want you to understand something. What happened tonight, what I said in there, I meant every word. You belong here, with me. Her breath caught. Sam, I know it's not been long. I know the circumstances aren't ideal, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being my housekeeper and started being... He struggled for the words. Started being the reason I get up in the morning again. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I feel the same way. But that doesn't change what's coming. No, it doesn't. But it changes how we face it. Sam reached for her hands, holding them gently in his larger ones. Together, Rebecca. Whatever comes, we face it together. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. Are you asking me to marry you, Sam Hayes? The words hung in the air between them, surprising them both with their directness. Sam felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Yes, he said quietly. I guess I am. even knowing what it might cost you? Your reputation, your safety, your standing in the community? Especially knowing that. He squeezed her hands gently. A man's got to stand for something, Rebecca. Might as well be love. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face in the firelight. Then, slowly, she smiled. The first truly joyful smile he'd seen from her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Sam felt something tight in his chest loosen for the first time in years. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and the warmth of her presence. "We'll go see Father Mackenzie tomorrow," he said against her hair. "Make it official before Walsh can cause more trouble." "Sam." She pulled back to look at him. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to whatever consequences come from my past." "I've been sure since the night you showed up at my door," he said firmly. "Everything else is just details." They were married the next morning in the small church, with Father Mackenzie performing the ceremony, and Sheriff Morrison and his wife standing as witnesses. Rebecca wore her blue dress from the dance, and Sam wore his best suit, the one he'd been married in before. It should have felt strange, wrong somehow, to be speaking the same vows he'd once spoken to Martha. But it didn't. This was different. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but something entirely new. A second chance at happiness that he'd never expected to find. Rebecca's voice was steady as she spoke her vows, her eyes never leaving his face. When Father Mackenzie pronounced them husband and wife, Sam kissed her gently, tasting salt from the tears on her cheeks. "Well," Morrison said afterward, "that should complicate things for Mr. Walsh. Lot harder to drag off a man's legal wife than it is an unprotected woman." They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and if the day felt different, more weighted with possibility and hope, neither of them mentioned it. They fell into the same routines they'd established over the weeks, Sam tending to the livestock, Rebecca managing the house, but there was a new ease between them, a sense of rightness that hadn't been there before. That evening, as they prepared for bed, the reality of their changed circumstances hit them both. They stood awkwardly in the kitchen, suddenly uncertain about the practical details of married life. "I can sleep in the spare room," Sam said finally, until you're comfortable with—" "No." Rebecca's voice was quiet but firm. "We're married now. Properly married. I want—" She took a deep breath. "I want to be your wife, Sam. In every way." He moved to her slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. When she didn't step away, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "Are you sure? After everything you've been through." "I'm sure." She leaned into his touch. "You're nothing like him, Sam. You've shown me what kindness looks like, what respect feels like. I trust you." He kissed her then, softly at first, then with growing passion as she responded. When they finally broke apart, her cheeks were flushed and her breathing unsteady. "Come to bed, wife," he said gently, and she smiled at the word. Their wedding night was tender, careful, full of quiet reassurances and gentle discoveries. Sam took his time, patient and attentive to her responses, determined to show her that physical intimacy could be about love rather than power. When she finally relaxed completely in his arms, giving herself over to trust and desire, he felt a fierce protectiveness rise in his chest. This woman was his now, legally and morally, and in every way that mattered, and he would defend her with his life if necessary. They were given 3 weeks of peace, 3 weeks to settle into married life, to learn each other's rhythms and habits, to build something solid and real on the foundation they'd already established. Rebecca bloomed in those weeks, her laughter coming easier, her smiles brighter. She threw herself into preparing for winter with the enthusiasm of a woman who finally had something permanent to protect. Sam found himself humming while he worked, noticed that the colors seemed sharper, the air cleaner. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have something to look forward to beyond the next day's chores. Rebecca had given him back his future. But on a cold morning in late November, their peace came to an end. Sam was in the barn when he heard the thunder of hoofbeats. Too many horses, moving too fast. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside to see them cresting the ridge. A dozen riders led by Edmund Walsh, with federal marshals' badges glinting on their coats. "Rebecca!" he called, and she appeared in the doorway, face pale but composed. The riders came to a halt in front of the cabin, horses snorting and stamping in the cold air. One of the marshals, a lean man with steel-gray hair, dismounted and approached Sam. "You Samuel Hayes?" "I am." "Marshal William Kane. I have a warrant for the arrest of Rebecca Walsh on suspicion of murder." He glanced between Sam and Rebecca. "I understand she's been staying here." "She's been living here," Sam corrected. "As my wife. We were married 3 weeks ago." Kane's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Well, married or not, she's still wanted for questioning in Denver. Mrs. Hayes, you'll need to come with us." Rebecca stepped forward, her chin raised. "I understand, Marshal. May I gather a few things? Make it quick." But as Rebecca turned toward the cabin, Sam stepped in front of her. "No." Kane's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "Sir, I'd advise you not to interfere with federal law enforcement." "I'm not interfering with law enforcement. I'm protecting my wife from what amounts to kidnapping." Sam kept his rifle lowered but ready. "You got a warrant signed by a federal judge?" Kane reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. Sam examined it carefully, noting the signatures and seals. "This warrant is for Rebecca Walsh," he said finally. "My wife's name is Rebecca Hayes. Don't play word games with me, son. We both know who she is." "Do we? Because according to this document, you're looking for an unmarried woman suspected of killing her husband in Denver. My wife is a married woman living legally on my property in Colorado Territory. Seems like a case of mistaken identity to me." Edmund Walsh pushed forward, his face red with fury. "That's my daughter-in-law, and she killed my son." "That's my wife," Sam replied calmly, "and she's never killed anyone." The standoff stretched taut, everyone aware that a single wrong move could turn deadly. Marshal Kane studied the warrant again, clearly weighing his options. Technically, Sam was right. The legal complexities of Rebecca's changed status could tie this case up in courts for months. "Mr. Hayes," Kane said finally, "are you willing to guarantee your wife's appearance for questioning if we arrange for it to be conducted here, in the presence of local law enforcement?" Sam felt Rebecca's hand slip into his, warm and steady despite the circumstances. "I am." "And Mrs. Hayes, are you willing to submit to questioning under those conditions?" Rebecca's voice was clear and strong. "I am, Marshal. I have nothing to hide." Walsh sputtered protests, but Kane cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Mr. Walsh, you wanted federal involvement, you got it. But we do things by the book, not by vigilante justice." He turned back to Sam and Rebecca. "I'll arrange for a federal prosecutor to come out here within the week. Until then, Mrs. Hayes, you're not to leave the county." "Understood." The marshals rode away, taking Walsh and his men with them. Sam and Rebecca stood in their yard, holding hands, watching the dust settle. "Well," Rebecca said finally, "that went better than expected." "It's not over yet." "No," she agreed. "But for the first time, I feel like we might actually win this." Sam looked down at her. This woman who'd faced down federal marshals with quiet courage, who'd stood by his side despite every reason to run. "We will win it, because we're not fighting alone anymore." The federal prosecutor arrived 5 days later, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Sullivan who'd clearly done her homework. She set up in Sheriff Morrison's office and spent 2 days interviewing everyone involved: Rebecca, Sam, the few witnesses Walsh had brought from Denver, and several character witnesses from Copper Creek. On the third day, she called everyone together for her decision. "After reviewing all the evidence and testimony," she announced, I find insufficient cause to pursue charges against Mrs. Hayes. The death of Thomas Walsh has been ruled accidental by the coroner, and there is no credible evidence to suggest otherwise." Walsh exploded. "This is a travesty! That woman is a murderer." "Mr. Walsh," Prosecutor Sullivan said coldly, "I'd advise you to be very careful about making slanderous statements. Mrs. Hayes would be well within her rights to pursue charges against you for harassment and defamation." The case was closed. Walsh stormed out, threatening appeals and political pressure, but Sam could see the defeat in his shoulders. He'd played his hand and lost, and everyone knew it. That evening, Sam and Rebecca sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The air was crisp with the promise of snow, but the cabin behind them glowed warm with lamplight. "It's really over," Rebecca said, wonder in her voice. "It's really over. I can stop running now, stop looking over my shoulder." She leaned against him, solid and warm and real. "I can just live. We both can." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, winter to prepare for, a ranch to run, a marriage to nurture. But tonight they were simply two people who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to build something beautiful together. "Sam?" Rebecca's voice was soft in the darkness. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Sam turned to look at her, memorizing the curve of her cheek in the starlight, the way contentment had settled into the lines around her eyes. "I love you too," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warm and bright, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind sang through the valley, carrying with it the promise of snow and the deep peace of a life well lived. They had found their home, not just in the land or the cabin, but in each other, and in the vast expanse of the American West, where survival often meant learning to stand alone. They had chosen instead to stand together. It was enough. It was everything. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in pristine white that transformed the harsh landscape into something beautiful and serene. Sam and Rebecca settled into the rhythm of married life like they'd been born to it, sharing chores and meals and quiet evenings by the fire. Rebecca threw herself into the domestic arts with the enthusiasm of a woman who finally had a permanent home to tend. She learned to make bread that rose perfect and golden, to preserve vegetables that would last through the cold months, to mend and darn and create order from the chaos of daily life. Sam found himself lingering in the house more often, drawn by the warmth of her presence and the simple pleasure of having someone to share his thoughts with. They talked during the long winter evenings, about the ranch, about their plans for spring, about the children they hoped to have someday. "I want a daughter first," Rebecca said one night as they sat by the fire, her sewing in her lap. "A little girl with your eyes and your steady way of looking at the world." "And I want a son," Sam replied, whittling a toy horse from a piece of pine. "Someone to teach about the land, about taking care of what's yours. We'll probably get the opposite of what we want. Probably. But we'll love them just the same." Spring arrived with a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers, and with it came confirmation of their hopes. Rebecca was carrying their first child, due in the fall. The news filled Sam with a fierce joy he'd never expected to feel again, and watching Rebecca bloom with pregnancy was like witnessing a miracle. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Matthew, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and his mother's gray eyes that seemed to take in everything with solemn wonder. "He looks like you," Sam said, cradling his son with the awkward care of a new father. "He has your stubborn chin," Rebecca replied, exhausted but radiant. As the years passed, their family grew. Matthew was joined by Sarah, then by another son they called Daniel. The cabin expanded to accommodate them all, with new rooms and wider porches, a proper kitchen, and a parlor where Rebecca could entertain the neighbors who'd become genuine friends. The ranch prospered under Sam's careful management and Rebecca's practical wisdom. They added cattle, expanded their grazing land, built a reputation for honesty and quality that brought buyers from as far away as Denver. The same city that had once represented nothing but danger and sorrow became just another market for their goods. Sam aged gracefully into middle age, his dark hair silvering at the temples, but his body still strong from years of hard work. Rebecca grew more beautiful with each passing year, her face gaining character and depth, her eyes bright with contentment and purpose. Their children grew up strong and healthy, nurtured by the love that had brought their parents together and the values that had sustained them through hardship. Matthew showed promise as a rancher, with an instinctive understanding of animals and land. Sarah inherited her mother's quick wit and practical nature, while Daniel displayed an artistic temperament that delighted them both. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Sam and Rebecca would sit on their porch and remember the night she'd first knocked on his door, scared, desperate, carrying nothing but hope and determination. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Rebecca asked one such evening, watching their children play in the yard. "Never," Sam admitted. "I thought my life was over when Martha died. I thought the best I could hope for was getting through each day. And instead? Instead, I got a second chance at happiness, a family, a future worth building." He took her hand, noting the calluses from years of honest work, the simple gold band he'd placed there so many years ago. "I got you." "We got each other," she corrected gently. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sam reflected on the strange turns life could take. A desperate woman seeking shelter had become the love of his life. A marriage of convenience had grown into something deep and abiding. Fear and desperation had transformed into hope and joy. In the distance, wolves howled their ancient song to the rising moon, and somewhere an owl called through the darkness. But inside the circle of lamplight that surrounded their home, all was warmth and peace, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. The American West was a hard place, unforgiving to the weak and unprepared, but for those with courage enough to stand together, to build something lasting in the wilderness, it offered rewards beyond measure, freedom, opportunity, and the chance to write their own story on the vast canvas of the frontier. Sam and Rebecca Hayes had written theirs with love, determination, and an unshakable faith in each other. And as their children grew and their grandchildren came to visit, as their ranch became a landmark and their story became legend in Copper Creek, they knew they had built something that would endure long after they were gone. Love, it turned out, was the strongest foundation of all. Years later, when Sam was old and his hands were no longer steady enough for the fine work of ranching, he would sit on that same porch and watch his grandson, Matthew's boy, another Samuel, learning to ride in the same corral where he'd once broken horses. Rebecca would be beside him, her hair white now, but her smile unchanged, her hand still fitting perfectly in his. "No regrets?" she'd ask, as she had so many times over the years. "None," he'd answer, as he always did. "Not a single one." And in the golden light of another western sunset, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on love and sustained by grace, Sam Hayes would close his eyes and give thanks for the night a desperate woman had knocked on his door and given him back his future. It was a good story, a true story, the kind that the West was built on, one heart at a time. The end.